Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Man, is it just me, or are you noticing that the mornings are getting that little bit darker every day? Not to mention the sun seems to be going down earlier in the evening. Yes, it's that time of the year where seasonal affective disorder is going to kick in, and the only positive thing that we got to look forward to is sipping on a pumpkin spice latte, only for someone to tap you on the shoulder and point out that it's a very lame and basic thing to do. It is a crazy world right now, isn't it? And on that note, a big warm hello to my friends in the US who have also got the added madness of an election to deal with right now. But rather than let the TV and those social media timelines push your buttons, come and join me for another great conversation of people leveraging technology to improve our future. And today's guest is Tim Breslin, and he's the CTO of a company called O3 World, which specialises in digital ecosystem consulting and also custom design and development delivery using new and emerging technologies such as AI, voice, IoT, conversational design, and the list goes on. But I also want to find out a little bit more about Tim too, because he started his career in the early 90s as a software engineer for Grant Thornton. He quickly transitioned into the digital agency space when it was in its infancy. And over the years, he's worked in publishing, ad tech, and the startup world in leadership roles at such a wide spread of organisations such as Digitas Health, Razorfish, The Onion, and Delphic Digital. I think it's fair to say we've got a lot to talk about today, and he's got some great insights to share. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Philadelphia so we can speak with Tim Breslin, CTO at O3 World. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Tim. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me, Neil. I'm a an advertising guy, I guess you'd call me. If you look at my past, I spent the bulk of my career in and around advertising, specifically at agencies. I did spend some time outside of that world in various stints. Worked for The Onion for a while, which is a big sort of satirical website for news here in the U.S. and also some larger sort of corporate America type companies. But at the end of the day, I had spent the bulk of my career in advertising.
And before you came on the podcast, we were just having a general chat, and one of the things I picked up straight away, and I thought, this guy's got a great sense of humour. So that must be where the Onion came from. Yeah. So what was it like working there?
Well, it's interesting actually, because it's always been a thing a publication that I particularly respected, admired, and was a frequent reader of. So I had all these dreams of sort of getting into The Onion. But at the end of the day, it was a job, right? Most things, the glamour wears off pretty soon. Now, the writers were just terrific and very funny. And I actually had a couple interesting events there. One, Ira Glass does a thing, This American Life, here in the United States again. Got a chance to meet him and just some other really amazing people. So it was a really great experience. But again, at the end of the day, the luster wears off after a couple years in anywhere.
That's so true. And of course, here in 2020, O3 World specialises in digital product design and development, from conceptualisation through implementation and the dreaded after support too. But what is it that makes you different from other agencies out there, would you say?
I think one of the things that's interesting is, again, as I kind of bounced around in my career, the grass was always greener on the other side. And one of the things that I always admired was the culture of the small boutique agency, right? The consulting company that had, a few dozen people, under 100 surely, and really knew how to do what they do really well, right? And they didn't have that bloat that sometimes you see in larger agencies or just larger companies in general. And we're located in what's called the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia, which is sort of like the Brooklyn of Philadelphia, if you're familiar with how Brooklyn is, right? So the idea here is that most of the people that work at O3 World have that sort of sense of craftsmanship. They really care about what they're doing, just like they do in areas like Brooklyn. They'll spend 4 hours making you that incredible taco by some mustachioed hipster. It's the same sort of thing here. We have a sort of the people that gravitate towards O3 World and sort of just the area that we're in, attracts a particular high caliber talent. And in this world, in the agency world, one of the reasons you see a lot of these great sort of companies coming out of New York and San Francisco and whatnot is because you've got to be where the really sort of talented young people are, and that's kind of where they are, or at least that's where they was. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Absolutely. And over here in the UK and Europe, of course, we introduced GDPR, which, of course, it had so many great things going for it, apart from filling our inbox up with 500 emails on the run-up to that legislation. But it completely improved privacy and increased awareness around privacy, but it also completely ruined the user experience on the web, because now you have to click 4 times accepting cookies or rejecting cookies, and some sites over in the US just say, you know what, we're not jumping through hoops, we're just not going to let you in, it's easier that way. But I'd love to learn more about the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. I mean, can you set the scene and tell me a little bit more about that legislation?
Yeah. So again, this is sort of the baby brother to sort of GDPR in a lot of ways. It's less restrictive, surely. But in the same sort of vein, it's focused on things like privacy, data privacy, the right to be forgotten. So it's very similar in a lot of respects. Now, it does only apply to certain types of businesses. So businesses that meet certain financial and user requirements. And it's also sort of confined to California, but as is the case with GDPR, people are just kind of looking at that as sort of a guidepost for what's to come. A couple of things that are interesting parallels to kind of what we do is that we sort of at O3 World have long since focused on data security and privacy as well as accessibility. And these are all sort of interconnected elements of sort of building a modern web product. So if you look, just a quick example, one of our clients is a big sort of coffee sort of maker here in the United States called Colombe. And, we've spent a good deal of time sort of buttoning them up from an accessibility standpoint, partly to sort of, remove them from potential lawsuits that may happen because a lot of it's very litigious world these days. And so there are companies out there kind of looking for large sort of retailers that are sort of not compliant with certain accessibility standards, but also data and that sort of stuff, right? So we were in a sort of process of sort of buttoning them up when this whole pandemic hit and sort of threw a wrench into the works. But because of our work with them, they were pretty well prepared. And to this, the situation they're now is working up to sort of CCPA compliance and even GDPR. A lot of our clients are just adopting GDPR guidelines here in the States, even if they don't do business in the EU, just because they kind of see the writing on the wall and they know that that's sort of something that is future-proofing.
And if we go back to the beginning of the year, it feels kind of weird, really, because we're all celebrating the entrance of a new decade of opportunity. We're hopping on planes, going to restaurants, bars, and tech conferences. The good old days, right? And the biggest thing we had to worry about in our life was the CCPA deadline passing on January the 1st. So I've got to ask, in that former world, what happened when that deadline passed, and how did companies ensure that they were prepared during that pandemic when it did arrive?
So, again, now there's a lot of through lines here. I'm going to talk beyond CCPA too. I want to talk about like business resiliency and business continuity as well. But, specifically with regard to CCPA, everybody thought that they'd have time and they'd be able to sort of, get their ducks in a row. And then all this happened. So there were a bunch of trade associations that sort of got together and they wrote a letter to the state attorney general requesting, additional time because of COVID and O3 World, we kind of took the stance that, you just kind of can't wait for these things. Right. And I think that you've got to, you just got to keep plowing ahead no matter what the climate is. But that's kind of ultimately what happened. There's been some delays and modifications to the CCPA guidelines, nothing really super substantive, but ultimately, I think that companies were ill prepared. Almost like our country was ill prepared to handle things. And you just kind of think, no, it'll pass. Everything will be fine. We won't get sued. And I think now people are really starting to sort of take notice, because the current economic climate, particularly here in the United States with regard to the pandemic, has sort of forced businesses to really, really take a lot of things like data privacy and business continuity very seriously.
And it did seem like the digital transformation was almost like a box-ticking exercise or a nice to have, but we all know that's completely changed now. So from the conversations that you're having with your clients right now, how has COVID-19 impacted digital transformation and business continuity, and what industries have been hit the hardest, do you think?
Yeah, so if you kind of go back to pre-COVID, businesses had requirements that they had to sort of live up to, right, around privacy and data, and there's all sorts of governing entities depending on if you're a financial company or if you're a medical company, all those sorts of things. They did exist. Now, I think that a lot of these documents, like business continuity, sat in a folder somewhere in a dusty room. Where it was basically like, if some lawyer comes to us and asks us if we have a plan, can you dust that thing off and bring it back from the laser printer down the hall, or whatever. Right? They didn't actually, and even a lot of companies, the templating from where they downloaded it on the internet was still there, right? Like the insert client name here, right? Because they really weren't held to account, right? They weren't. They had these things. They checked the box. But as soon as this all started happening, companies, I think, really realized that it is. As they go through the steps, they realize, well, we should have probably thought about this a little bit more. So it was a crazy scramble. Now, O3 World, because we're smaller, and because we sort of constantly, are sort of forced to think, nimbly for our clients, right? We use the right tools. We use tools like Slack and cloud-based tools and things like that. We're not on these sort of legacy platforms that are very bespoke and have all these security requirements around them. We have, and we are forced to, as an agency, to work with what our clients work with, but also to embrace the idea of being nimble and being light. So we, fortunately, were in a very good spot to basically just go remote on day one. Without missing a heartbeat. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, even some of our clients, were not as well positioned. But we were able to take from that, some learnings and really help our clients sort of enable them to sort of work from home in the right sort of way. And I'm not saying that all the challenges have been fixed. It's surely, I think one thing that's happening now is people, are in this space where they're kind of like, well, it's really great to work from home with my kids and I get to see more of my family. But it's a double-edged sword. It's like when your kids are constantly demanding your attention, or, you can't get away from your spouse, for even a minute. You start noticing, problems in your house, cracks in your ceiling that you didn't notice before, and you gotta fix them. All this stuff, I think, has created this desire in some to sort of get back to the workplace. Now there are others, particularly in my field, engineers and designers and whatnot, that really think best when they're in a quiet room with their headphones on. And because the agency world is a typically young world, you end up having a situation where younger people are less likely to have kids and houses and spouses and things like that. So I think that, for our world, a lot of these people have been able to adapt pretty quickly, but a lot of organizations have really struggled to kind of figure out. And there are very specific tactics that you can use to sort of mitigate some of these issues. Restaurant, some of our clients, again, if you have a business that's very, focused on people and very, high touch in terms of like interactions and that sort of thing, physical interactions, you definitely took a pretty big hit. So, we've all read the news about hotels, the travel industry, you see restaurants, all those the companies were hit pretty hard. Unfortunately, and I shouldn't say unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on, which side you're sitting on, the tech industry actually is booming.
Yeah.
Right? So this has created other problems within industries where we're now competing with people in New York and San Francisco and all these other sort of demographics. So, it's difficult in the short term, but I think in the long term, businesses will evolve, and displacement, does exist in the short term again, but people are not going to eat less. They're probably going to eat the same, if not more. So it really is a shift to a different way of sort of consuming. That's been a long time coming, but this has definitely sort of pushed the needle on a lot of these topics for sure.
And I appreciate this is a pretty big question. I'm not even sure if there is an answer for it out there. But in your opinion, what is the secret in creating an immersive digital experience? Because again, this is an area that a lot of businesses and brands are chasing at the moment, especially with things like augmented reality waiting on the horizon.
Yeah, so it's again, a couple of things that O3 World, just to draw some parallels here. O3 World has recently, within the past few years, done just an incredible amount of AI and sort of ML, that really sort of helps personalize interactions. And so, one thing that, typically people talk about when they talk about creating sort of immersive digital experiences, or at least in my tenure, they talk about thinking big and telling a story, engaging your audience, be where your consumers are, being multimodal. But really getting interpersonal is probably the biggest trend I see, and the biggest secret sauce to sort of creating a really immersive digital experience. And part of that is just the recognition that different people want different things, and you can't sort of be one thing to all people. And in the past, technology did not exist to allow that to be a reality. But now we're pretty sophisticated, and we're able to assess information about individuals and really be very predictive and smart about serving up them up the right content, putting information in front of them that's relevant. So you're starting to see a lot of the through lines there between AI and ML, and just sort of evolutions. And sort of the experiences you get on the internet, and some of the pioneers of this, right? And it's super creepy too. Right now it's creepy. We call it creepy, and in the future it'll just be like the way things are. But when you start to type an email in Gmail or in LinkedIn, and it completes your sentence for you, and you're like, what? Like, why doesn't it just write it for me? If it knows what I'm saying. Sometimes it gets it hilariously wrong, but as time goes on, that's less and less a thing. And where we may find that creepy, my children start to rely on that sort of thing the same way we do spell checking. So, there's pluses and minuses to it, but definitely the world is changing, and it's getting much more personal. One anecdote that I'd like to bring up is that, when I, first started to realize there was a world around me, I won't tell you how many years ago, but a few. I noticed that music had a very interesting property of being local. And that was partly just because of limitations in technology, right? It was delivered to you through, the airwaves, and the airwaves were local. So I could go to different areas of the world, and I could see the types of kids that were punk kids or into goth or whatever it is. And they all dressed and looked different. Now, it's not easy to market to people that all want to buy different things. Somewhere, a few years later, MTV came along and started to send pictures along with that music, and really tell people exactly how they needed to dress in order to fit in with a particular group. And that was the mainstay for decades. But we're starting to see that break down a bit. And if you talk to my daughter, the thing that's important is uniqueness. And that's because right now we live in a world that's what everybody else is doing is highly visible. And so there's this preference to being unique. There's this preference to being different than other people. And it's harder to market when that's the preference, or it typically has been. But with personalization, you're able to really deliver custom experiences to people, even custom products to people that otherwise in the past was just impossible.
And in that world of uniqueness, that means nobody's allowed to have a pumpkin spice latte anymore, right?
right. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm glad you mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning, because there is so much hype around it at the moment, especially in digital products. And so I'm curious, what are the trends and fads that you're seeing in that area? And what do you think will stay? And ultimately, what do you think won't as well? And it'll just be one of those tech passing fads like 3D TVs?
Yeah, well, I don't think it'll be a passing fad. Let me start off by saying that. So much so that the company, that O3 World, is really sort of through our ventures program and our labs program, we've invested very heavily in sort of what we're calling Urban.ai, which is a sort of an AI agency, right? They have a core product that really solves a lot of AI issues. Now, if you look at AI in the past 10 years, I'd say, what you saw was people saying, here's a bottle of AI, just sprinkle it on your problem and it goes away, right? They sold AI as this product, this thing you could buy that would just alleviate all sorts of really complex business problems. But the truth is it doesn't work that way, and most problems don't. So the idea behind Irvin is that we're an AI agency, right? So what we do is we basically, we're partnered with Urban and very involved. But what we do is look at AI through the lens of a complex problem that needs to be solved with a series of very bespoke solutions and technology. And in a world where there is just so much out there in terms of AI, so many different products, so many different methods, your best solution is also is oftentimes a combination of a variety of different things. So I'm kind of tired of the whole AI story being the dystopian robots that take over the world, because that seems to be what most people envision the future as. And then the other thing is the form of AI that everybody, when you say AI, they assume Alexa, right? They assume like, oh, well, it's a thing that I'm going to talk to and it's going to talk back to me, and that's just one facet of AI with regard to sort of natural language processing and sort of conversational interfaces. And we do a lot of that, and there is an advantage to that. But AI goes much further than that, right? There's all sorts of less glamorous, less chat-based type AI that you're starting to see in terms of how patterns are recognized and how recommendation engines work and sort of all sorts of business solutions that are sort of under the hood logistics. There's all sorts of stuff where AI is making the previously impossible possible. But it is, when you talk about building product, and I'll say this, with regard to websites, right? We look at websites and web product as sort of this abstraction that we understand, right? We all look at it and we say, okay, well, I totally understand the idea of a mouse, right? But that wasn't always the thing. I can remember, teaching my great aunt, Aunt Catherine, about a mouse when she first got it. And she had worked in a factory her entire life. So I was trying to sit there and say, all right, and Catherine, this is a folder. And she's like, yeah, it looks like a folder. And I said, you know what this is? And she says, it's a little document. I can tell because it's got the dog ear. I used to do that when I worked in the office, right? All these physical constructs. And she's like, is that the waste paper bin? I was like, we don't call it a waste paper bin. We call it a trash can. But yeah, that's what it is. It's a waste paper bin. And you just, and I said, so if you want to move that document to the trash, you just click on it, you drag it, and you let go of it. And then she was lost. At that point, like the concept of moving this little thing that was connected to her TV, that's what she thought it was, her TV, to move some abstracted document into it. It was just lost on her, right? But it wasn't lost on me. And like nowadays, my kids are born, I can remember when my now 11-year-old was born, she was like trying to zoom in on the magazines with her fingers. Like she was like 1 year old. I was like, it won't work on a magazine. But the idea that things change so dramatically and the paradigm sort of shifts, we all just assume that, oh yeah, websites, the idea that if I want to search for something, I look for the little magnifying glass. Why is it a magnifying glass? I don't know. It's Sherlock Holmes, I guess. Somebody a long time ago said, oh, let's put a little magnifying glass next to the search box. So you search for something and results come up, and then you have to click them. The screen goes white for a second, and then it goes back to the server. All these things that we just accept as the way a system should work are not necessarily things that, we're born understanding. But one thing that we are born understanding is what we're doing right now, which is a conversation, right? It doesn't matter how old or young you are. People naturally like to have conversation to solve problems. When you go to Home Depot and you ask the person, well, I don't know about washing machines, but this is what it sounds like. And, or this is the problem that I'm having. And so if you look at a lot of problems and a lot of reason people use products, whether it's Uber or just a shopping website or whatever, a lot of the times, not all the time, but a lot of the times the problems are things that if somebody was actually talking to you about it. It's like, well, what do you need? Oh, I need a car. I know where you are. It's those types of experiences that are sort of more conversational, that are also more natural, and there isn't a learning curve. And the only reason interfaces didn't exist like that from the beginning was because we didn't have the technology. So we had to put a big scrolling web page with a thing called a scroll bar and a device that was connected to a box with a cord called a mouse. And you had to, it was like a flight look. You had to 2 fingers on this to roll up. All these constructs are sort of built in. We understand them, but they are nothing more but constructs, which in my opinion, over the next few years, as sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning evolve, the way humans interact with computers, the way they interact with brands, the way they obtain services, I think all of that is dramatically going to change.
And as someone that's spent 20 plus years and that got experience and insights in e-commerce, digital products, marketing data, and customer experience industries, first of all, I'm going to say I love the fact that you've still got your enthusiasm and passion for everything that you do, and it really shines. But I've got to ask, what are the biggest lessons that you've learned on your journey?
Well, I think that a couple things. I think that, again, the world is rapidly changing, right? and people forget the fact that less than 100 years ago, we were kind of essentially using sticks and stones, and the pace of shifting has done nothing but increase. And also, it usually comes from directions you just don't know. I can vividly remember when I got the iPhone, the original iPhone, and I was that guy that was going to be in line the first day. Right. So I got it. And I think I was on a trip at the time. So I was in the airport and I was using it. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to be the impressive guy at the restaurant. Everybody's going to say, oh, you got the new iPhone. And I was going to say, oh, yeah, check it out. And everybody was going to be a superstar in my own way. Right. In the airport. But my friends are calling me. They're like, what do you think? And I was looking at it and I just was like, well, you know what? I think everybody's going to have one of these in another year. I can't imagine a universe where this isn't the new thing. But it totally changed the way people thought about interacting with computers and sort of digital products and everything. The customer experience sort of industry was sort of turned upside down because nobody really kind of fully thought things were going to go that way. And then overnight they did. So, you can't predict, you can try, but, nobody could predict COVID, or nobody did somebody did, Bill Gates did, other people did, but, in the large sense, it just happens and then you just kind of deal with it. And the same with the iPhone. So you just got to be nimble. You've got to really kind of think on your feet and pay attention to the trends, but also as you start to see change happening, sort of embrace that change and sort of go with it. Another thing is that, people, think they want a thing, but they rarely actually, what you believe they want and what they actually want are rarely the same thing. We spend a lot of time sort of looking at data about users and sort of trends and things like that. But we do that, at some level with a grain of salt. We know that really it's a continuous process. You have to sort of always sort of look at, reevaluate, what people want and how they're using systems, because, it changes almost on a daily basis. So it's unlike it was in the past, where it was, I can remember when I first got into the career, it was like, I'm going to build the website and then I'm going to do some research and then the website's done. Right? Like we don't need to touch the website for another couple of years. It's done. Put a checkbox next to that. It's not that way anymore. And digital experiences and customer expectations are changing daily. And really, the idea of an agency, right, is an agent, right? If you think of Hollywood, an agent looks out for your best interests, right? It's not just a person that does work for you, right? Yeah. That agent is somebody that has your best interest, is kind of forward thinking about your career. Don't take that role. You'll be stereotyped in that particular role or pigeonholed. We provide that same service for our clients. And I think that, when you look at sort of the last 20 years, I think that the most successful experiences and engagements that I can recall building or being part of were ones where the client was really a deep partner with us, as opposed to just a one and done type scenario.
So true there. There are so many changes happening at a breakneck speed at the moment. And one particular one that particularly intrigues me at the moment is the switch from touchscreens being the solution to everything to now, of course, nobody wants to touch anything. And we've got this low touch economy developing, and we've got Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple, all working on a presumably AR headset. So I don't know where that's going to head, but what excites you about the road ahead, and what role do you think O3 World will play in that future?
I really like that O3 is sort of at the forefront of sort of visionary experiences, right? Trying to basically really sort of build for the future. As I said, I think that AI and ML, machine learning and artificial intelligence, and IoT, things like that, hyper personalization, are all things that excite me. They're all things that I think are dramatically changing the world as we speak. If you think about years ago, if this COVID thing happened before Zoom and before some of the things that we have, the world would have stopped. It would have ground to a halt. There would be no way around it. But fortunately, because a lot of sort of the digital transformation that has happened over the past 20, 30 years, we were sort of in a better position to sort of adapt to some of these unprecedented changes. I look at the road ahead, and I see things like social media and how that sort of changed the world. I see touchscreen interfaces and how that sort of changed the world. And I really do think the next thing will be sort of automation at some level. And I think that there will be, unfortunately, a lot of displacement in that sort of system in a lot of the same ways that, factories were displaced years ago, right? And when the cost of labor, the economics revealed it could be cheaper to get it done in another country. But now you're seeing a lot of that coming back. It's reverse globalization, right? You're seeing a lot of these suppliers and factories and things like that now start talking about like, well, it's very fragile to have a system where we're so reliant upon all these different, places far away. So I think that and I don't want to say this the wrong way, because it's definitely a terrible state we're in. And I think that, the country at large, and the world at large, I think there are a lot of challenges that we have, a lot of discrepancy in sort of, wealth and a lot of sort of social issues and the pandemic, all sorts of stuff. But, there's part of me that loves the turmoil, in the sense that it requires, we have some big problems to solve, right? There are some really immensely huge problems to solve. And if we can harness sort of the energy of sort of the youth of today and apply some of this just fantastic technology that has evolved over the course of the last couple decades, I think it's challenges are fun. The bigger they are, the more fun they are. The more complex they are, the more fun they are. So I'm, in a way, very excited about the prospect of digital transformation, the prospect of finding a way to create a better world. I think O3 World, if you look at, sort of our DNA, we do solve problems, but we're also very sort of aware of our mission to make the world a better place too. So, we've got to keep the lights on. So we're servicing our clients and sort of making sure that we're doing well by them, but we're also really focused on trying to ensure that, we're doing our jobs as stewards of not only Philadelphia, but of the world, to sort of, use our superpower, which is sort of the people that we have and the knowledge that we have to sort of make the world a better place.
That's a beautiful moment to end on too. And of course, one other thing I can't presume now is that you've got a .com email address. We have everything from .org, .ai and .tv, and there's a long list of domains now. So for anyone listening that would like to find you online or even contact a member of your team and continue the conversation we started today, what's the best way of doing that?
The best way to do that is to go to o3world.com. That's O, not zero, o3world.com. And sort of we have a variety of social channels that we sort of communicate on, but everything's accessible from there, and you can kind of learn about all the great stuff that we're doing.
Excellent. There's so much I love about what you're doing as well. It's not just digital ecosystem consulting. It's that custom design, development, delivery, using new, but also emerging technologies like we mentioned there, AI, voice, IoT, and conversational design. But I think what stands out more than anything is your agency's long-term approach to strategy and innovation, because it's not all about the technology. It is that strategy side of things that's so important now that so many forget. So more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on and joining me today.
Thanks a lot, Neil. I really enjoyed it.
So much I loved about the conversation there, especially when we're exploring how to create immersive digital experiences and how digital product builders and developers need to understand the why behind the build. And yes, things like artificial intelligence, machine learning in digital products are incredibly exciting. But like I said a few moments ago at the end of our conversation with Tim, was that it's their agency's long-term approach to strategy and innovation. That is the real cool stuff for me. And possibly what's even cooler than that is Tim himself, because between the podcast recording there, we kept things professional, but we just hit it off straight away. And he's officially on my list of great guys to share a beer with. I think we could have a whole heap of fun. But hey, that is a completely different podcast episode right there. But watch this space. But what I would like to throw out to everybody listening today is how COVID-19 has impacted your digital transformation efforts and also your business continuity plans, because I think we were all sleepwalking our way through life for many, many months, even years. And I think every business has now been, I don't want to use the word reset, but almost kickstarted into thinking differently, working differently. And I'd love to know how you and your business are adjusting to that change of pace. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, if you want to comment on today's show or even just ask me a question. Whatever it is, you know where to find me. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, he's just at Neil C. Hughes. I am the easiest guy in the world to find, so please keep those messages coming in. And I'm going to disappear off into the sunset now, which has arrived much quicker than usual, and get another guest lined up for you bright and early tomorrow morning. But as always, you guys are the show, so a big thank you to each and every one of you listening wherever you are in the world. Stay safe, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.